Hope and possibilities. Boy, we need that in relationships. Sometimes something called enmeshment creeps in. What is enmeshment? What does it do to our relationships? We're going to talk about that next here on Hope and Possibility.
Dr. Gregory Jantz is a best-selling author of over 45 books and the founder of the Center A Place of Hope, voted a top 10 center for depression treatment in the U.S. As the pioneer of whole person care, Dr. Jantz is known as the messenger of hope. Now the nation's expert on anxiety, depression, substance abuse, relationships, trauma, and PTSD, here is Dr. Gregory Jantz.
Hi, it's Dr. Greg Jantz, and yes, enmeshment. What is it? And how do we deal with it? How do we set boundaries? How do we get healthy in our relationships? Let me just tell you, I got a lot of notes. This is such an important topic. I am going to cruise fast because you know what? I like fast podcasts that get right to it and don't talk about a lot of stories and give you the info. I'm jumping right in. This whole idea of enmeshment was brought up. It was an Argentinian therapist, 1974. Okay, a little while ago. And it's a little bit confusing, but and it's very dysfunctional. But basically, here's what I'm going to say. This is the original definition. Enmeshment is most easily understood as families that are emotionally stuck together in various ways. Enmeshed family members lose their individuality, their autonomy. If I'm enmeshed with you, I'm probably codependent. I'm taking my identity through you. I'm taking my whole experience of being a person. It's incomplete. I have to be enmeshed or tied in to other family or family members. Let's just use the word empathy. Let's say in the family, and empathy is that ability to feel and create understanding with another person. Let's say empathy. And in a family that's enmeshed, one person in the family may carry all the empathy. They are the empathetic one. I know this sounds maybe a little unusual, but if you think about how families work, this is the person, they're absorbing all the problems of the family, and they're carrying everything. And that kind of makes the emotional intelligence of the family a bit lopsided. So kids that are brought up in enmeshed families, I made a note of this, they find themselves overly involved in what the needs of the parent are. Sometimes you see a little caretaking going on. And this really prevents us from healthy emotional development. Now, enmeshed families, family members probably are not really encouraged to have their own thoughts, their own feelings. I'll call this toxic enmeshment. And there is an enmeshment that comes with trauma. And if you've been traumatized, and it could be emotional abuse, name calling, comparisons, it could be emotionally really significant emotional abuse where you really feel devalued. Could be physical abuse. You maybe saw domestic violence. You could have received physical abuse. Here's what we know. The whole area of abuse, it could be sexual abuse as well, creates potentially almost a bond, if you will, with that abuser. There is something that happens, we call it a trauma bond. And so I'm looking at enmeshment in a family and calling it enmeshment trauma. Anytime you're in a family, there's deep enmeshment, everybody's intertwined together. There's usually been some family trauma, and it gets really toxic, gets really dysfunctional. And then as family members grow, they graduate from the family and enter out into the world in other relationships, perhaps get married, they carry this enmeshment with them, and they may have a hard time with bonding, attachment, having healthy, intimate relationships. So as you look at this, okay, Enmeshment, I know it's an interesting word, but it's hard to separate our sense of self from others. A lot of times what sends somebody to come to the center or place of hope is trauma in a relationship. A loved one was traumatized through whatever form of trauma. Trauma comes in different forms. And then we struggle with what is healthy relationships? How do I maintain and have a healthy relationship? And it can be a big challenge. But we typically discover this after we leave home. We typically discover this when we try to connect and have relationships with others. So I have got a whole heading here, the impact of enmeshment on relationships. And I wanted, it's kind of like a little test. Now, the word dysfunctional describes it, but that is such a overused word. I came from a dysfunctional family. Well, who didn't, right? Maybe it's varying degrees of dysfunction or dysfunctionality. So we know that, by the way, interesting studies with families. I'm going to make it really simple, really fast, but families with great enmeshment, we find that oftentimes you may see later developed attention deficit hyperactivity disorder with young boys. We see with girls a lot of times show later symptoms of depression. Really interesting how this works. How do you know if your relationship's enmeshed? I've got a list of bullet points that I've put together here that I want to go over. And so, number one, you need an excessive amount of love and support or reassurance from your loved one, your partner, your spouse. Let me say this again. This is really a big one. You need an excessive amount of love and support and reassurance from your partner. And if your partner doesn't respond to these requests fairly immediately, you might feel some very strong emotions instantly that are kind of hard to contain. Those emotions might be the emotion of anger or jealousy or insecurity. This could be really a significant pain in the relationship. As we look at this, we go, okay, I know something's wrong. I know something's unhealthy. But what is it? And it's hard to put our finger on it a lot of times. Now, you may find that it's intolerable if you have a partner that's not around physically or gone for any period of time. And you will find I have to spend enormous amounts of time with my partner. And the term joined at the hip may be an appropriate term. So this is common in enmeshment. And there's an over neediness. I need him or I need her, and I'm so incomplete without her, and I've got to be around her, and I've got to physically be touching one another. It's not affection. It's an over-dependency that could come out in just physical signs as well. All right. You might find another sign of enmeshment. I've made a note here. You put your partner on a pedestal. You might believe the other person's more intelligent, more capable, more worthy, more deserving of you. And this can be... it really makes the relationship very lopsided. And you'll find out that you can't have any other emotional closeness with anybody else. It's like you just can't do it. You only have this one person that I'm referring to as partner. All right. And if your partner is not available, you may act out in ways that can be quite destructive to bring attention back to you. This could be addictive tendencies, a crisis. Sometimes it could look like bipolar, where I'm so excited, I'm up high, and I do all kinds of things, and I crash and bring a lot of attention on myself. So, wow, this is just a little highlight on this enmeshment, this toxicity in relationships, enmeshment trauma. You see, enmeshment has a life of its own. We get it maybe from childhood, and then we pass it on in the current relationship. That relationship ends, we pass it on, or we keep replicating it in a family, enmeshment. And we call it normal, but it's not healthy. And it's not a normal healthy, but we're so accustomed to this intertwinedness. Now, I believe we can come together and be a strong team, and there's interdependence. But if we're looking for the other person to meet all of our needs, to meet everything that, everything that is, we have to be happy. That's not going to happen. That does not happen. All right. So let's introduce boundaries. So boundaries come in. And boundaries are what's okay for you and what's not. How about that for simple? Boundaries can be really misunderstood. We can go, okay, boundaries, I need to be able to say no. And then you say no to 100% of things, and you swing too far, and you become what I call really rigid and stiff in your boundaries. Boundaries for a healthy person are a little more porous. Now, if boundaries don't have any clear definition, that's also what I'm going to call enmeshment. But a boundary is a separation between you and me, what's okay, what's not. And, everybody's boundaries, we teach a lot on boundaries at the center, but everybody's boundaries, depending on how, are a little different. Depending on how you grow up, your experiences, what phase of life you're in, cultural boundaries. So we just need to look at it in that light. Now, a family that has, I made a note, has too strict boundaries, or unspoken boundaries. Like, I would never do that in my family. Well, why not? I don't know. We just don't do it. Where you have a fear of punishment, a fear of rejection. Now, part of being a teenager is teenagers test boundaries. I think that's their job description. They start to grow up, they start to test boundaries, and, they're pushing on, and they're beginning to discover themselves and a little bit of separation. And the testing of boundaries sometimes can go too far. Then it's clearly rebellion, and they stay in that mode. That's not what we're looking for. But a normal developmental stage would be kind of testing boundaries, growing up, and becoming my own individual. That's normal. Now, how do you know if you have good boundaries? Okay, let's look at this. Examples of internal boundaries. Here you go. You know and you honor your own capacity. If I say yes to everything, I'm probably not completing anything. I understand my own internal boundaries. I am also taking responsibility for what is really mine. I'm taking personal responsibility. That's an internal boundary. I'm pretty aware. I cultivate self-awareness. I learn. If I have good internal boundaries, I'm learning from my mistakes. I'm learning how far something can go internally. And have you ever met a person, by the way, and they kind of say yes to everything, but they don't finish really anything, and they have a really super hard time of delivering? And they may have so many unfinished promises, unfinished projects. Now, their intention is really good. But intention doesn't equal completion. And so they have a struggle with that. So, an internal boundary that of self-regard is we're courteous and we're not defensive. Probably a person that's hypersensitive and very defensive is really struggling with this internal boundaries, their sense of self. Related to this is just honoring our limits. If you say yes to everything, you learn from it and you make adjustments, and then you learn from it and you grow. and you honor those internal limits. You begin to get a sense of what I can do and what I can't do, what I can say yes to. So this is, a healthy person with healthy emotional intelligence has healthy boundaries. All right. Now, external boundaries. This is what we communicate to others. We're able to communicate our needs and expectations, and you'll verbalize it. Here's what I'm able to do. Here's what I need from you. It's healthy communication. With some people, it's hard to set boundaries around time. You go, if I'm with them, I lose track of time. I can't control time. I get sucked into whatever's going on for them. I know if I see this person, it's going to take a lot of time. And so you're struggling with boundaries with this person. But you're able to be aware of that and set boundaries and set those limitations externally in the relationship. All right. Another one I need to mention is an external boundary is I acknowledge when I made a mistake. I acknowledge and I seek forgiveness when I've made a mistake. A external boundary is one that when I make a mistake, I'll seek forgiveness. I understand the importance of that relationship. All right. Now, a couple thoughts on unhealthy boundaries. Unhealthy boundaries. They disregard other people's values, other people's wants and needs and limits. So if you feel bullied or pushed around, it's somebody that does not respect a boundary. Now, unhealthy boundaries could mean a person has a hard time speaking up, granting permission. A healthy boundary, a person, maybe they seem introvert and they're overly quiet. They're afraid to exercise a boundary. So why do people find boundaries so difficult? I think a lot of it is what we learned in childhood. A lot of it is we didn't have good, healthy role models of what's healthy. A lot of it is we don't see this modeled very healthy. And if there's addiction in the family, boundaries get really fuzzy. If you grew up with an alcoholic parent, there probably was a potentially enabling, enmeshment in boundaries, over caretaking, not safety in the home or environment with emotions. And so as you look at how did I grow up? Well, I either learned how to have healthy boundaries or I didn't really. And if addiction was there, I probably didn't learn what was healthy. All right, the other one I want to mention today is if I do not set healthy boundaries, I set up for resentments. I set up to be angry in relationships. I will feel like I'm being violated. I will feel like other people are controlling me, controlling my time. And I mention that because a lot of people who have this enmeshment in relationships end up being very resentful, very, very angry, very hurt. And I think I see a lot of that internal anger and conflict inside, and they tend towards probably sickness, towards chronic stress, and because it's just a poison to the body. Now, okay, how do we have healthy boundaries? Final thoughts without being overly controlled, without controlling other people. And one of the ways to start is take work, family, partner, if one exists, or friends, and practice. It takes a little bit of time, but have the practice communicating with them, and just being aware of boundaries. Practice this. Hear yourself saying, I'm sorry, that's not going to work out, but what I'm able to do is this. Or I have some plans and some things I need to take care of at the same time, so that's not going to work for me. Don't overly explain, but you begin to initiate and build. At first, they seem like a little bit soft boundaries, but you start to set parameters around the relationship, and those parameters begin to create health. And you will keep practicing it, and you'll get better at it, and you're going to feel self-respect. You create a respect that other people will have more respect for you, as well as you will find yourself being sensitive to when there's a boundary violation, you go, oh, that didn't feel right. Okay, do you ever have somebody that walks into your life and they're kind of walking all over you, or they seem so needy and they are asking for so much advice and so needy that and they never end the conversation, and when they finally leave, you feel, I feel exhausted and I feel kind of slimed on. What happened here? Okay, that's a boundary violation. Listen to it. Hey, you'll understand as you practice this more and more. Lots of great resources out there on boundaries. Lots of great resources, because that is the beginning building block to dealing with what I'm calling here enmeshment and enmeshment trauma in our life. Now, I have something that's super exciting. As I'm doing this right now, today, the arrival of a new book that we worked on all last year just arrived, just my copies. And I want to mention it now. And I'm going to leap over here and grab, because I just got these like hours ago. There we go. Oh, Triumph Over Trauma. Triumph Over Trauma. If I have enmeshment in a relationship, if I have trauma in relationships, if I've been traumatized, if I've been told I have post-traumatic stress disorder, if I am struggling constantly with intimacy in relationships, that's all the things I talk about here. How to have victory, how to have triumph over trauma in my life, whether it's multiple traumas, whether I've turned to addiction. Triumph over trauma. I had to just mention this. Literally, it was just brought up to me, and I've hardly had a chance to flip through my own brand new book. But Triumph Over Trauma, finding healing and wholeness. I like wholeness. I love the whole person, and it's healing and wholeness from past pain. All right, good to be with you on this topic of enmeshment trauma, and I really do believe. See, this is the great thing about this topic is we can practice, learn, and our relationships and our boundaries keep improving, and we keep feeling healthier. And when we feel healthier, we take better care of ourselves, and we have healthier relationships. Good to be with you today.